Welcome back to House Parties. So glad you are here. We are wrapping up our month of February here at Chaos, which is wild. It's basically springtime, which means school's basically over, which means summer is basically here, which means it's pretty much time for camp. Camp's awesome. Registration actually opens next week at Rush, so be ready for that. We're talking about dead things coming back to life in our series Awaken. So far, we've seen two Old Testament stories of resurrection, one with Elijah and one with Elisha. They each saw a boy pass away. They prayed some bold prayers, and God moved in a way only He can. And this week, we're actually headed to the New Testament. We're going to Jesus. Our story this week is in Luke chapter 7. And I hesitate to call it a story, because that makes it sound like it's a bedtime story like we made up. But this is real, right? These are real people, real situations. It's history. And when we really think about it, like that helps us stand more in awe of our God, because it helps us think about, like, if we were there, if we got to really witness this, how would it change us? How would it shape us? We want to ask those same questions today. So Luke chapter 7. Jesus is in the middle of his ministry. He's been doing pretty amazing things. He's been teaching some really amazing, profound things. And we're picking up right after Jesus finishes teaching his most famous message called the Sermon on the Mount. And he just had this really cool encounter with like a Roman officer who had faith in Jesus, and Jesus heals his servant. And then in verse 11, we see Jesus and his disciples traveling to a village called Nain. And by this time, Jesus is pretty well known, right? Word has continued to spread every time he teaches or does something miraculous. So it's not just Jesus and his disciples. There's a whole crowd going with him. And so Jesus and the disciples and the rest of this crowd are entering the village. And as they enter, they're met by another crowd of people. It's a funeral procession. This young man had passed away. His mom was the only one left. She was a widow. She'd already lost her husband and now her only son. And it says a large crowd was with her. The crowd was there to be part of like a funeral procession. It was like an important Jewish tradition. The body would be wrapped after death and carried out of the city from his home to the burial site, and the family would of course walk with him. Other bystanders in town would join as they walked by. There would even be like hired people to mourn and weep, to basically draw attention to what was happening. And so essentially, the grieving mother would be leading this procession, and most of the village would be right behind her. And as they're leaving the gates of the village, here comes this other crowd. And Luke writes what happened as the two crowds meet. Verse 13 says, when the Lord saw her, that's Jesus, he had compassion on her and said, don't weep. Just picture how many people are walking around. Like, you ever been in a crowd like that where there's people trying to go like opposite directions? And I don't think there was like a traffic pattern or crossing guards to keep it from being chaotic. Takes me back to a few years ago when I went to Universal. It was like just after Christmas. It was the week between Christmas and New Year's, and the park was packed. Like, everywhere you looked, it was just people. And it wasn't organized. They were trying to get it organized, but like you just couldn't, people were trying to move. There was just this massive traffic jam that wasn't working. I went to that part like Hogsmeade area, and it was insane. You could barely move, let alone get in line for like a butterbeer. There was no line. It was just a mass of people. And I'm picturing something like this as the funeral procession of the whole town walks out and a large crowd following Jesus attempts to walk in. And when you're in a crowd of people, it's hard to like see anyone specific. It's just a sea of generic faces. And honestly, when I'm in this situation, I just put my head down and try to get to where I'm going. I don't see anyone specific. I just see a crowd, like a blob. But not Jesus. Jesus sees her. He sees this grieving mother, and he doesn't just notice quickly and get back to walking to his destination. He sees her and he cares. Like, he has compassion. And our God is a God of compassion. Over and over in the Bible, we see God described as compassionate and gracious. His compassion is motivated by this deep and amazing love that leads to his desire to rescue those in need, to save those who are in despair. And this is how Jesus sees this woman. Not with pity, not with like the thought of like, oh man, that stinks, I feel bad for her. But instead with so much love and empathy that he moves to action for her. He tells her not to weep, because he's about to change the reason for this procession of people. Verse 14 says, then he came up and touched the open coffin, and the pallbearers stopped. And he said, young man, I tell you, get up. And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Jesus touches the stretcher or the coffin thing that they were carrying the dead man on, which is a bit of a no-no. Like Jewish law, that would have made him unclean and would have to go through all these steps to be clean. And so the pallbearers are caught off guard. Like, why would this guy interrupt their funeral and touch a dead guy? And then Jesus tells the dead man to get up. Like, Jesus commands life, and life obeys. He sits up, he starts talking, and I love the crowd's response to this. Then fear came over everyone, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people. The word fear is less like terrified and scared. It's more awe and wonder. I mean, imagine what would happen in this crowd. You have people who were mourning, they're now celebrating. You have the man who was dead is now alive again. There's no need for a funeral anymore. And you have this crowd who's been following Jesus. Maybe they've already seen some amazing things, or maybe they're like waiting for more. Maybe they only heard what Jesus could do, and now they're witnessing it. People are probably freaking out. There's probably screams of shock and cheers as the crowd realizes what just happened. People looking at each other being like, did you see that? And Jesus bringing the dead to life had them in awe, had them worshiping. Like they recognized how amazing it was, and they recognized who it was. They said, God has visited his people. They knew who showed up. They knew it could only be God who brings life like this. An incredible moment just happened as Jesus was on his way to his destination, and he noticed someone on the way there. Jesus was moved by this woman's pain, so he brought life to the situation. And I don't think anything has changed in 2,000 years. Jesus still sees us. He sees our struggle, sees our pain, sees what's dead in our life, and his love and compassion know no limits. Resurrection power flows through compassion. It starts with understanding that this is how Jesus sees us. This is how Jesus moved for us. Through his love, compassion, and power, he brings us to life and begins to resurrect those dead parts of us. And once he's at work, we can allow the heart of Jesus to then shape us. We become compassionate like he is. We see others like he does. We care enough to step into spaces like he did. This compassion moves us toward dead things, towards lost causes, because we already learned there are no lost causes. And our God can bring anything to life again. And yeah, you and I have no ability to bring dead things to life, but we know who can. And we can pray to the one who gives life, and he can lead others to him. So where does this story of resurrection leave us? First, we have to realize this is a real story, and it's personal to us. You and I, we're that dead guy. Maybe you're currently that dead guy or girl. Jesus sees you. He sees through the crowd. He sees through the chaos. He sees the real version of you, the dead parts for what they really are. And he's not annoyed. He's not disappointed. He's not angry. He is full of love and compassion, and he's moving towards you, willing to make dead things come to life. The same Jesus who made this his way through these two crowds to stop a funeral is willing to stop for you as well. But it doesn't stop there, because once you've experienced that kind of compassion, you can't stay the same. It changes you. And if Jesus sees people in the crowd, then we don't get to ignore them either. And if Jesus moves towards brokenness, then we don't get to avoid it. If Jesus interrupts his plans to bring life to dead spaces, then maybe we need to start paying attention to who's in front of us. We are surrounded every day by people who are desperate to be made alive, by people with parts of their life that aren't really living. And tomorrow, for instance, you're going to walk through hallways that feel like crowds. You'll pass who knows how many people on your way to class. And what if God wants to interrupt our normal routine this week so you can step into someone's struggle? What if God is calling us to see others, to feel compassion like he does, and to move towards others so he can use us to bring life where it's so desperately needed? And so here's the question. Are we just going to admire what Jesus did? Or are we going to ask him to give us vision and compassion for those around us?